More than a dozen armored vehicles, supply trucks, and multiple Russian infantry groups were reported knocked out of action in a short burst of fighting near Pokrovsk, according to Ukrainian sources, as FPV drones and reconnaissance UAVs dominated the airspace. While exact loss figures are still being reviewed, one fact is already clear. A mechanized push that included tanks, infantry carriers, and additional anti-drone protection failed to move past its opening phase. The advance stalled not because of a single lucky strike, but because almost every movement was detected, tracked, and punished from above. What makes this episode stand out is not the damage alone, but the pace. Vehicles were hit before reaching contact lines. Infantry were targeted while moving, regrouping, or carrying ammunition. Supply routes became exposure zones instead of lifelines. In this environment, even slowing down became a risk, and stopping often meant destruction. This pattern points to a deeper shift on the battlefield. Ukraine did not rely on isolated drone hits or dramatic moments. Instead, aerial surveillance and FPV strikes worked together to control timing, direction, and distance, turning the low sky into a constant filter that decided who could advance and who could not. What unfolded near Pokrovsk suggests more than a failed assault. It signals how traditional attacks are losing effectiveness when every road, tree line, and ruined building is watched from above, and when precision strikes arrive faster than units can adapt. Phase 1. The infantry infiltration. The sequence opens with Russian infantry moving in small groups near the Pokrovsk-Novopavlivka sector, where uneven spacing and broken formations quickly created gaps between soldiers as they attempted to cross open ground and damaged terrain. One soldier drifted farther than intended, stepping away from cover while trying to adjust direction. That single movement was enough to draw attention from the Ukrainian reconnaissance UAV, already circling above the area. The drone did not rush the strike because its first task was to keep the target in sight, holding engines at an angle while the soldier continued forward without realizing he had been marked. Within moments, an FPV drone was launched toward the fixed position, flying low and fast as the isolated infantrymen looked for shelter among trees and debris that no longer blocked observation from above. The distance closed quickly, and the encounter ended before any regrouping was possible, leaving no time for warning or coordination with nearby troops who were already moving in different directions. Around the same area, other Russian soldiers attempted short relocations, stepping out from ruined buildings or moving between tree lines. Each movement was followed closely by drones that maintained visual contact from the air. Some tried to slow down and wait, while others rushed forward in the hope of reaching cover, but neither choice changed the outcome once the UAV held the position and guided the next strike. As one target was hit, nearby motion became visible as well. Since soldiers instinctively react by running or changing direction, which exposes additional positions to aerial tracking, FPV drones arrived one after another, adjusting course as targets moved. The ground situation shifted rapidly as small infantry elements were removed before they could link up or form a defensive line. The fighting at this stage stayed close to the ground, focused on individuals in small groups rather than large formations. Each engagement unfolded within seconds once contact was made. This activity took place along approaches leading toward Pokrovsk, an area treated as sensitive because pressure here threatens supply routes and opens further access toward the Dnipro-Petrovsk region. That context explains why drone crews remain active even against single soldiers. Clearing the edges prevents infantry from stabilizing positions ahead of larger movements. As the sequence continued, attempts to pause inside temporary shelters also failed. Since entry and exit points were watched, any movement inside damaged structures was picked up the moment a soldier stepped out to relocate. Several engagements followed the same rhythm: detection first, tracking next, and a strike that arrived before nearby troops could respond or even confirm what was happening. The ground picture became fragmented as Russian infantry no longer moved as a connected unit, but as scattered figures reacting under pressure, each trying to avoid the next drone overhead. No clear front line was visible at this stage, only a series of short, sharp encounters that removed manpower piece by piece, while the surrounding area remained under observation. By the end of this phase, the result was not measured by territory gained or lost, but by the absence of organized movement as infantry presence thinned out and coordination broke down before heavier forces could come into play. What began with one soldier losing contact turned into a wider clearing action, where movement itself became the trigger for engagement, and the opening rhythm of the battle was set by drones rather than by troops on the ground. Phase 2, the Mechanized Advance. The second phase began as Russian forces shifted from scattered infantry movement to a concentrated mechanized advance near Pokrovsk, with tanks and armored vehicles moving together along defined routes toward Ukrainian positions. The column formed with infantry carriers following close behind heavier armor, engines running continuously as crews pushed forward to cross open ground before contact could fully develop. According to information cited by Reuters, Ukrainian sources described this as an unusually large mechanized effort inside the Pokrovsk area, involving around 30 vehicles rather than the smaller probing movements seen earlier. As the vehicles advanced, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones were already overhead, holding position and tracking direction while the column moved through exposed sections of road and damaged urban edges. FPV drones began to appear shortly after, flying low and approaching from multiple angles as the mechanized group continued forward without breaking formation. At first, the impacts occurred near the front of the column, striking vehicles that were leading the movement and forcing crews to react immediately under pressure. One vehicle slowed after being hit, and those behind were forced to adjust speed and spacing as dust and debris spread across the route. Several carriers shifted slightly off the road in search of cover, while others broke to avoid collision, causing the original alignment of the column to loosen. FPV drones continued to arrive in quick succession, targeting vehicles that were no longer moving at the same pace as the rest of the group. As the advance stretched out, individual vehicles became separated by short gaps, and each gap drew more attention from drones circled above. Infantry inside the carriers were now faced with limited choices: remain mounted in vehicles that were under threat, or prepare to dismount into areas already watched from the air. Additional FPV drones struck from the sides and rear, hitting vehicles that had drifted away from the main body or slowed to navigate obstacles. Tanks that were expected to push through were forced to reduce speed as well, since moving ahead alone left them exposed while support vehicles struggled behind. The route became crowded with damaged equipment, smoke, and debris, which narrowed movement options and limited the ability to maneuver or turn around. Drivers focused on steering through blocked sections, while crews scanned for threats that could not be seen directly from inside armored hulls. FPV drones exploited these moments, adjusting flight paths to follow vehicles that attempted to change direction or pull into partial cover. Several carriers came to a halt after taking damage, and nearby vehicles slowed down further as crews tried to avoid disabled equipment. The mechanized group no longer advanced as a single unit, but as separate elements reacting to immediate danger from above. Communication became difficult as movement fragmented, with vehicles spread unevenly along the approach and no clear path forward. Ukrainian drones maintained pressure throughout this phase, striking targets that hesitated or stopped, then shifting quickly to the next visible vehicle. Each new hit added to congestion along the route, turning the planned advance into a confined space filled with obstacles and limited exits. Infantry dismounted in some areas, seeking shelter near vehicles or nearby structures, while drones continued to circle and watch these movements closely. The push lost forward drive as more vehicles were damaged or blocked by those already disabled ahead. Attempts to regroup were constrained by constant drone presence, which tracked any renewed movement along the same routes. The advance ended with vehicles scattered along the approach, some damaged, others stationary, and crews focused on survival rather than progress. Phase 3, the drone kill chain. The third phase centers on how Ukrainian forces ran the drone kill chain during the fighting near Pokrovsk. As reconnaissance UAVs and FPV drones operated in a clear sequence rather than acting alone, the action began with reconnaissance drones holding steady above the area, watching damaged vehicles, halted columns, and nearby infantry positions without rushing into immediate strikes. These UAVs stayed high enough to avoid ground fire while maintaining visual contact and adjusting position to keep targets inside the camera frame as movement continued below. Once a vehicle or group of soldiers was confirmed, coordinates were fixed and passed on, and the reconnaissance drone remained in place to track changes on ground. FPV drones were then launched in turns, not as a single wave, but one after another, each one guided toward a specific target already marked from above. As the first FPV closed in, the reconnaissance drone continued to watch, allowing adjustments if the vehicle shifted direction or if infantry moved away from the original position. When the first strike landed, the process did not stop because the UAV overhead immediately checked the result and looked for remaining movement around the impact site. If a vehicle was damaged but still mobile, another FPV was sent in, approaching from a different angle while the reconnaissance drone maintained line of sight. Infantry who dismounted after a hit were also tracked, as their movement became visible once they left the vehicle or attempted to regroup nearby. This sequence repeated across multiple targets, with each strike feeding information back into the next action, creating a steady rhythm rather than isolated moments of contact. Ukrainian drone crews operated this process continuously, rotating FPV drones while keeping the same reconnaissance platform on station whenever possible. This meant Russian vehicles and infantry were rarely surprised by a single drone. Instead, they were held under observation while follow-up strikes were prepared. As FPV drones arrived in sequence, crews on the ground faced repeated pressure with little time to change position between impacts. Vehicles that attempted to move after an initial hit were tracked again, and infantry who ran from one piece of cover to another remained visible during each relocation. The reconnaissance drone played a key role throughout, keeping the area mapped and preventing targets from disappearing between strikes. Smoke, dust, and debris from earlier impacts did not stop the process because the UAV above could adjust altitude and angle to maintain visibility. As more FPV drones were used, the space around the halted advance became increasingly controlled, with movement below reacting to threats that arrived in a predictable but relentless order. This system removed guesswork from the fight. Detection came first, confirmation followed, and strikes were launched only after targets were locked in place. The result on the ground was a loss of initiative, as vehicles and infantry were forced to react to drones rather than pushing forward or reorganizing. Even when numbers remained on paper, the ability to act freely disappeared as the kill chain stayed active over the same area. Phase 4, hunting the dismounts. By the time this phase was fully underway, the battle no longer depended on sudden clashes, but on which side controlled the sequence of observation and strikes near Pokrovsk. That control allowed Ukrainian forces to decide when and where each engagement happened, while the mechanized group below remained under constant watch. With armored vehicles damaged or stopped, soldiers dismounted and moved in small numbers, heading toward nearby houses, temporary shelters, tree lines, and shallow field positions in an effort to stay out of sight. Some slipped into ruined buildings through broken doors or collapsed walls, while others dropped into hastily dug pits or pressed themselves against forest edges where branches still offered partial concealment. Ukrainian drones remained active in these areas, circling slowly and watching for movement as infantry attempted to relocate from one hiding place to another. When a soldier stepped out of a doorway or shifted position inside a damaged structure, the movement was picked up almost immediately, and the location was held under observation. FPV drones were then sent toward these points, flying low through streets filled with rubble or along the edges of tree lines where infantry were trying to move quietly. Inside the ruins, damage to buildings limited safe exits, and blocked stairways or collapsed roofs forced infantry to move through predictable paths that were already watched from above. What was once considered shelter now worked against them, because damaged walls and open ceilings allowed drones to look directly into spaces that no longer provided full protection. Along the forest edges, similar scenes played out, as soldiers pressed deeper into cover, then broke toward another patch of trees when they sensed danger overhead. Each movement created a brief window where position was revealed, and drones held that window long enough for FPV strikes to follow. Some soldiers tried to remain still, hoping drones would pass over, while others chose to move quickly and accept the risk. Both choices carried danger when observation continued without pause. FPV drones approached from above and from shallow angles, entering courtyards, slipping through gaps between structures, and closing in before soldiers could relocate again. As each strike landed, nearby infantry reacted by running or changing direction, which revealed additional positions and drew further attention from drones already in the area. The ground situation became fragmented, with no clear line and no stable pocket where troops could pause long enough to recover coordination. What stood out during this phase was how rapidly pressure built once infantry lost the protection of vehicles, because every choice had to be made under constant observation. Some groups managed short withdrawals, but even those movements were tracked until they reached the edge of drone coverage or disappeared into deeper terrain. Others were forced to abandon planned routes when FPV drones arrived, pushing them into unfamiliar ground where cover was thinner and escape paths were limited. As the fighting continued, the number of active infantry in the area dropped, not through a single clash, but through repeated engagements that removed soldiers one by one. By this stage, the battle was no longer about holding ground, but about surviving long enough to exit the watched zone. The pressure did not come from a sudden assault, but from sustained pursuit that followed infantry through every type of shelter they attempted to use. What remained was a battlefield where concealment was fragile, movement was costly, and even brief exposure could bring immediate consequences under the low sky around Pokrovsk. Phase 5, Logistics and Conclusion. The fifth phase showed how drone pressure shifted from striking vehicles to breaking the ability of Russian forces to reorganize, as FPV attacks followed soldiers along supply paths and retreat routes near Pokrovsk. After the mechanized push collapsed, small groups of infantry attempted to restore order by moving ammunition forward, guiding wounded comrades back, or crossing open ground to link with other elements. These movements took place along narrow paths, damaged streets, and exposed gaps between buildings, and Ukrainian reconnaissance drones kept these routes under watch as soon as motion appeared. When soldiers carried boxes of ammunition by hand or moved in pairs toward a fallback position, the activity was spotted quickly, and FPV drones were launched toward those points before the group could complete the transfer. Several engagements unfolded in this way, with FPV strikes landing on men who were not advancing or attacking, but simply trying to keep their units supplied or alive. As a result, attempts to regroup stalled because the loss of a few key runners or carriers interrupted the flow of ammunition and forced others to stop and hide. The pressure continued as retreating soldiers tried to cross short open sections between shelters, and drones followed closely, closing distance before the group could reach the next piece of cover. Unmanned ground vehicles carrying ammunition were tracked along predictable paths. Once detected, FPV drones dived in to hit the load, often triggering secondary explosions that left the route unusable. Artillery placed inside dugouts or covered with camouflage was found in a similar way, as reconnaissance drones scanned for disturbed earth, entry points, or heat traces that revealed the position. FPV drones then flew directly into these shelters, reaching guns that were no longer firing but still critical for support and defense. With each such hit, the ability to provide covering fire or resupply nearby infantry weakened, and the remaining troops were left without the support they expected. Soft vehicles played a key role in this stage, as trucks and civilian vehicles taken for military use attempted to move fuel, food, and ammunition toward the front. These vehicles traveled along roads already watched by drones, and several were struck while still on the move before they reached unloading points or protected areas. Some drivers tried to stop under trees or near damaged buildings, but the movement itself drew attention, and FPV drones approached before cargo could be dispersed. When these vehicles were hit, the damage was not always dramatic, but the effect spread. Fuel did not arrive, ammunition ran low, and relief units were delayed. The loss of these soft targets did not show as a single battlefield explosion, but it slowly emptied positions and forced remaining soldiers to conserve resources. As supply routes failed, coordination broke down further, and small groups were left isolated without clear orders or the means to continue fighting. By this point, the battlefield was defined by absence rather than presence, as fewer movements appeared and fewer attempts were made to re-enter the area. Ukrainian drones continued to patrol the same zones, striking any renewed effort to move men or equipment forward. This control was reinforced by sustained drone availability, supported by plans to acquire millions of FPV units, which allowed pressure to remain constant rather than temporary. If Pokrovsk is a gateway in this campaign, then the fighting around it delivers a blunt and uncomfortable message. What happened here shows how quickly a traditional push can lose meaning once the low sky is controlled and every movement is watched. Armored columns created the image of strength at the start, yet that image faded once drones dictated speed, direction, and timing. Step by step, the battle shifted away from direct clashes and toward control of movement, where UAVs and FPV drones decided who could advance and who had to stop. This was not about one dramatic hit, but about a steady process that removed options until the push collapsed on its own. It points to an effort to turn the drone kill chain into a daily routine rather than a special tactic. The open question ahead is how Russia responds to that pressure. Electronic warfare, bad weather, and dispersion may slow the damage, but it is unclear whether they can truly break the cycle. At the same time, Ukraine faces its own test. Can production, training, and coordination stay strong enough to make moments like the defense of Pokrovsk a repeatable standard instead of a one-time success?